Could the New York Knicks pull off a Paul George trade? Recently, there's been some rumors around the New York Knicks and the Los Angeles Clippers revolving around a Paul George deal. And ever since the Knicks brought in Leon Rose as their president of basketball operations, his main goal was to bring in superstars to the organization. And PG could potentially be the first guy that fills that criteria. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports. I make opinionated NBA content. And if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. After struggling for the last 20 or so seasons, as of late over the previous couple years, the New York Knicks have certainly had much more success. As in their previous 3 seasons, they made the playoffs twice, and they even won a playoff round this previous year. And although when you compare that to some other organizations, it wouldn't necessarily be seen as successful for different teams, but when you look at the New York Knicks' lack of success over the last 20 or so seasons, the past 3 seasons have certainly been a nice breath of fresh air. And in my opinion, the main reason why I see these previous 3 seasons as successful isn't necessarily only due to the fact that they made the playoffs twice and won a playoff round this previous year, but is more so due to the fact that they were able to make the playoffs with a relatively young roster. Because when you have a relatively young roster and you're having success, you can only expect that team to get better when the years do progress. Because when you look back at the 2013 season for the Knicks, they also made the playoffs and they were arguably even a better team then than they were this previous year. But the difference is, at that point, the Knicks were a relatively older roster, and if they weren't able to win the championship during that 2013 year, it probably was going to go downhill from there, and eventually that's exactly what happened. As the Knicks ended up losing in the second round to the Indiana Pacers, the seasons following that, the Knicks just continued to get worse and worse until eventually they became one of the worst teams in the NBA. And as I said, the main reason for why they weren't able to sustain that success that they had during the 2013 year was due to the fact that they had a really old roster at that point. But shifting back to this year's New York Knicks, the expectations have changed. As going into this previous season, the Knicks didn't really have all that many expectations, as the year prior to that, they didn't play well whatsoever. But after the Knicks were able to have a lot of success this previous season, making it to the playoffs and even winning a playoff round, as I mentioned, the expectations are obviously going to be much higher now. And something that a lot of teams do when they're at a similar stage to where the New York Knicks are currently at this point is they trade for a star. As it's pretty clear that the Knicks' current roster is capable of making the playoffs and maybe even making it out of the first round, but I don't necessarily know if they're going to be a real playoff contender as currently constructed. So in my opinion, the next logical move would be to look to trade for a star or to look to trade for some other guys to complement this roster, but at this point it seems like the Knicks are headed in the direction, or at least thinking about heading in the direction of trading for a star. And that star player that they're looking at is Paul George. Now, before we get into the potential trade details, let's look at Paul George the player. What does he do well out there? So starting with his offensive abilities, it's pretty clear that he's an extremely talented and an extremely diverse offensive player. As from that 3-point range, PG does a tremendous job at hitting that catch and shoot 3-point jump shot, also does a really nice job at crossing over, sidestep, or even step backs into 3-point jump shots, and overall from that 3-point range, PG is just a very efficient and a very effective scorer from that range. But moving on to his mid-range shooting ability, this is also a tremendous aspect of his game as well, and this is arguably the best aspect of his game, at least in my opinion. As from that mid-range area, PG has all those same similar abilities from that 3-point area in terms of his catch and shoot mid-range jump shot, his crossover, sidestep, or step back mid-range jump shot as well. But from that mid-range area, PG also does a really nice job at hitting that one dribble pull-up, does a tremendous job at hitting that post turnaround fadeaway, and once again, similar to his 3-point shooting ability, from that mid-range area, PG is just very efficient and effective. But once driving all the way to the basket, PG is also extremely effective as well, as he has a ton of athleticism out there and clearly has the capability to dunk over players or finish around players with crafty layups with his left or right hand, and even also has the ability to finish through contact and get N1 finishes as well. Now, also once driving all the way to the basket, PG has a pretty nice nice floater within his game as well. But overall, when you look at all 3 levels of his offensive game, it's pretty clear that PG is extremely versatile and he does everything very well. Now, even besides his individual scoring ability, Paul George is also very effective defensively, as he's one of the better defenders really in the NBA. He also does a really nice job at rebounding, both offensively and defensively, and even offensively he does a decent job at facilitating for some guys out there. And I definitely do think adding a player of the caliber of Paul George would certainly be a positive for the New York Knicks, as PG does have a style that fits in with a lot of different guys in the NBA, and especially when you talk about some players on the Knicks, I do think PG would fit in pretty nicely. But now, the obvious question is, what would the New York Knicks need to give up in a potential Paul George deal? Because obviously when you're trading for a player of the caliber of PG, you're gonna have to give up a decent amount, but at the same time, I do think there are a couple of factors that would benefit the Knicks in terms of they wouldn't necessarily need to give up as much as they traditionally would for a player of the caliber of Paul George. And those factors have to be the age of Paul George alongside with his injury concerns. As over the past couple seasons, PG has been injured a lot of the time. Whether you talk about in the playoffs or whether you talk about during the regular season, either way, it certainly is a concern. And when a player is injured as much as PG has been, obviously that's going to take away from his trade value, at least somewhat. So even though I do think the injury concerns are a risk for the New York Knicks, I also at the same time do think it could benefit them in the sense that they won't necessarily need to give up as much as they otherwise would have if PG was very healthy over the past few years. But in terms of the actual deal, I do think it's somewhat tricky, as the Clippers at this point are in somewhat of a weird situation in the sense that they don't necessarily know if they should fully rebuild at this point and trade away Kawhi Leonard as well, or they should put a different star alongside Kawhi and trade away Paul George. But potential players that could be involved in this deal are Julius Randle, although this is also somewhat tricky due to the fact that Julius and PG have some connections between each other, but other guys could be RJ Barrett, Obi Toppin, Emmanuel Quickley even, Mitchell Robinson, Quentin Grimes. There's a ton of different players that could potentially be involved in this deal, but one thing that is for certain is the Knicks are probably going to need to give up at least 2 unprotected first round picks. Now, the reason I'm not saying the Knicks would need to give up 3 or more first round picks is due to the injury concerns with PG alongside with his contract, but at the end of the day, I still do think the Knicks would need to give up at least 2 first round picks unprotected also. And at this point, it is somewhat difficult to say if this trade would actually go down or not. I do think it is pretty clear that the Knicks have the assets in order to acquire a player of the caliber of PG, but at the same time, it is yet to be seen if the Knicks are actually willing to move on from those assets, and also if the Clippers are also willing to move on from Paul George and completely blow things up, or if they just want to go in a different direction from PG and put a different star alongside with Kawhi. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the New York Knicks should trade for Paul George, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.